I used to believe the cruelest words were shouted. I was wrong. The ones whispered with a smile could leave scars no one else would ever see. My name is Emily Carter, and on the morning everything changed. I woke up at 5:15 a.m. to the soft sound of my 6-year-old daughter humming while she folded the tiny blanket she insisted on making herself every morning. Our apartment was barely 600 square feet. The heater clicked louder than it warmed the room, and the coffee maker groaned like it was begging for retirement. But Lily smiled as if we lived inside one of those perfect homes from television. That was her gift. She found sunshine in places I only saw shadows. I packed her peanut butter sandwich into a paper bag, brushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear, and promised we would stop for hot chocolate after work if my paycheck stretched far enough. She nodded without asking questions because she had learned far too young that grown-ups sometimes made promises they prayed they could keep. The Moretti estate sat nearly 40 miles outside Manhattan, hidden behind towering iron gates and ancient maple trees that looked older than the country itself. I had worked there for almost 8 months as part of a private housekeeping service, cleaning guest suites before large charity events. Most of the staff barely noticed me, and honestly, I preferred it that way. Invisible people rarely became targets. That morning, however, my regular babysitter canceled 30 minutes before my shift. Every neighbor I trusted was already working. Every daycare was closed for a local holiday. I almost called in sick until my supervisor quietly told me to bring Lily just this once, as long as she stayed beside me and remained respectful. She always did. Lily wore her favorite pale blue cardigan and carried a tiny coloring book tucked beneath her arm. She whispered that the mansion looked like a castle where kind queens probably drank tea instead of giving orders. I laughed because children still believed beautiful places belonged to beautiful people. Inside, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors while florists hurried between towering arrangements of white roses. Caterers rolled silver carts through endless hallways, and servers practiced balancing trays with perfect posture. Everyone moved quickly because one of the city's most influential charity luncheons would begin before noon. I was dusting the grand staircase while Lily quietly colored at a small table near the sunroom, exactly where I could see her, when the front doors opened with a sharp echo that silenced conversations around the foyer. Expensive heels struck the marble one deliberate step at a time. A woman dressed in an ivory designer suit removed her sunglasses without bothering to greet anyone. Diamonds shimmered around her wrist, but her expression was colder than the winter air outside. She slowly scanned the room until her eyes landed on Lily, then shifted to me. Her lips curled into something that looked almost amused. She took 3 measured steps forward, looked directly at my daughter, then back at me, and spoke loudly enough for every employee and guest nearby to hear. "Who allowed you in here?" The room became so quiet that I could hear the soft scratch of Lily's crayon against the paper before she slowly lifted her head, her wide blue eyes searching my face instead of the woman standing a few feet away. Children always know where to look first when they are trying to understand whether they are safe. I forced myself to smile at my daughter, even though my heartbeat suddenly felt much louder than the string quartet playing somewhere beyond the ballroom. "She is with me," I answered as calmly as I could. "My babysitter canceled this morning. She has stayed out of everyone's way." The woman gave a slow laugh that carried across the marble foyer. It was not loud, but somehow everyone heard it. Caterers stopped arranging silver trays. 2 servers exchanged uncomfortable glances before pretending to polish glasses that were already spotless. Even the event coordinator lowered her clipboard for a second. "With you?" the woman repeated. "This is one of the most exclusive homes in the state, not a neighborhood daycare." Her words were smooth, polished, and perfectly controlled, which somehow made them sting even more. I lowered my eyes for a moment, reminding myself why I was there. Rent was due in 4 days. Lily needed new shoes before school started again. Pride had never paid a single bill. "I understand your concern," I said quietly. "She will remain beside me until my shift ends." Instead of accepting the explanation, the woman stepped closer to Lily. My daughter instinctively hugged her coloring book against her chest and took one small step backward until her shoulder touched my leg. "Sweetheart," the woman said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "People are here to support important charities today. They are not expecting children wandering around." Lily looked up at me and whispered, "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" That question hurt far more than anything directed at me. I knelt beside her and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. No, sweetheart. You have been wonderful. I could feel dozens of eyes watching us, but none of them offered a single word. It amazed me how quickly silence could become permission. The woman folded her arms and glanced toward the nearby staff as though expecting someone else to remove us. Nobody moved. My supervisor looked frozen between duty and fear. I could not blame her. People who depended on these events for their careers learned not to challenge wealthy guests. I slowly stood, determined to leave with as much dignity as I could gather. Come on, Lily, I whispered. We will wait outside for a little while. Lily reached for my hand without complaining. She always trusted me, even when I was not sure I deserved it. We had barely taken 2 steps when she looked back toward the enormous staircase and quietly asked, Mommy, I thought castles were supposed to have kind people inside. I did not know how to answer. My throat tightened around words that refused to come. Just as I reached for the brass handle leading toward the front entrance, I heard the soft tap of a cane against polished marble, followed by the calm voice of an elderly woman speaking from somewhere behind us. Before anyone leaves my home, she said, I would very much like to know who decided they had the authority to make that choice. Every face in the foyer turned toward the staircase before I did. The tapping sound came again, steady and unhurried, echoing across the polished marble with a confidence that did not need to compete with anyone's voice. I slowly looked back and saw an elderly woman descending the last few steps with one hand resting lightly on an elegant wooden cane. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, and she wore a simple navy dress without the diamonds or designer labels that surrounded the other guests. There was nothing flashy about her appearance, yet the room seemed to shift around her as naturally as flowers turning toward sunlight. The event coordinator immediately straightened her posture. Several members of the household staff lowered their eyes with quiet respect. I noticed it before I understood it. The woman who had embarrassed us smiled politely, although the smile carried more calculation than warmth. Mrs. Moretti, she said, I did not realize you had arrived. The older woman did not answer her immediately. Instead, she looked at Lily first. My daughter still held my hand, her coloring book pressed against her little sweater. The woman offered Lily the gentlest smile I had seen all day. That is a lovely drawing, she said softly. Lily hesitated before holding up the page. It is a castle, she whispered. I thought this place looked like one. The older woman studied the picture for a moment. Every beautiful home needs kind hearts inside it, she replied. Otherwise it is only a building. Something tightened in my chest. Those words were so simple, yet they felt like warm sunlight after standing too long in the cold. Then her attention turned toward me. Emily, she said. My eyes widened. I had never told her my name. Before I could ask how she knew it, she continued with a quiet smile. It is nice to see you again. Confusion swept over me. I searched her face, trying to place where we had met, but nothing came. She must have noticed because she chuckled softly. You probably do not remember me. Kind people rarely keep score. The woman in the ivory suit folded her arms. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I was simply protecting the standards of today's event. Mrs. Moretti slowly turned toward her. There was no anger in her expression, only calm curiosity. Protecting them from whom? She asked. From employees bringing children into a private gathering. The woman answered without hesitation. There should be boundaries. Mrs. Moretti nodded once as though carefully considering every word. Interesting. She glanced back at Lily. Tell me, young lady, have you touched anything that did not belong to you? Lily shook her head. No, ma'am. Have you been running through the house? No, ma'am. Have you been kind to everyone? Lily looked down at her shoes before answering. I tried. The older woman smiled again. That is exactly what I hoped you would say. A quiet murmur spread across the room. I could feel people watching more closely now, sensing that something important was unfolding. Mrs. Moretti took one slow step forward until she stood beside us instead of across from us. She rested one gentle hand on my shoulder, and for the first time since arriving that morning, I no longer felt completely alone. Then she lifted her eyes toward the woman in ivory and asked in the same calm voice, Before you questioned who allowed this mother and her daughter into my home, did it ever occur to you to ask whether I was the one who invited them? The question settled over the room like fresh snow, quiet but impossible to ignore. Nobody answered. Even the soft music drifting from the ballroom suddenly felt distant. The woman in the ivory suit blinked once before recovering her practiced smile. "Surely there has been some confusion," she said carefully. "I only wanted to preserve the atmosphere of today's gathering." Mrs. Moretti tilted her head ever so slightly. "Kindness has never damaged the atmosphere of my home," she replied. "Pride usually does." I felt Lily squeeze my hand a little tighter. She looked up at the older woman with complete trust. The kind children gave only to people who made them feel safe without trying. Mrs. Moretti noticed and gently reached into her pocket, producing a wrapped peppermint. "Would your mother allow you one piece of candy before lunch?" she asked. Lily looked at me. Instead of answering, despite everything that had happened, I almost smiled. "One piece is fine," I said softly. "Thank you." Lily accepted it with both hands. "Thank you, ma'am." "You are very welcome, sweetheart." Around us, conversations remained suspended. Wealthy donors, event planners, servers, and security staff all stood frozen, waiting for someone else to speak first. Then something happened that made the silence even heavier. One by one, members of the household staff straightened as Mrs. Moretti glanced across the foyer. The head butler offered a respectful nod. The house manager stepped forward with quiet composure. Even the security supervisor lowered his head before saying, "Good morning, Mrs. Moretti." The greeting spread naturally through the room. "Good morning, Mrs. Moretti." "Welcome home, Mrs. Moretti. We are glad to see you again." It was not rehearsed. It was respect earned over many years. The woman in ivory slowly lost the confidence that had filled her voice only moments earlier. She looked around as if realizing she had misunderstood far more than the seating chart. I did not realize." She began. Mrs. Moretti interrupted her with remarkable gentleness. "That is becoming clear." She turned toward me again. "Emily, several months ago, I fainted outside a neighborhood pharmacy after skipping lunch during a charity visit. Do you remember a rainy Tuesday?" The memory struck me instantly. An elderly woman had become dizzy while standing near the curb. I had helped her sit down, bought her a bottle of water, and waited with her until she felt steady enough to continue. She had insisted she was fine. I had insisted she eat the turkey sandwich packed in my lunch bag. "That was you," I whispered. Mrs. Moretti smiled. "You missed half of your own lunch break because you refused to leave a stranger alone." I felt my face grow warm. Anyone would have done that. She looked directly into my eyes. "No, Emily. They would like to believe they would. There is a difference." She glanced toward Lily. "And when I tried to repay you, you politely refused because you said your daughter would rather see you help someone than accept a reward." Lily looked surprised. "Mommy really said that?" I laughed quietly. Apparently I did. Mrs. Moretti rested both hands on the top of her cane. "I have spent many years meeting successful people. I have learned that success impresses the world for a season, but character quietly shapes generations." Her gaze shifted back toward the woman in ivory. "So let us be very careful about deciding who belongs inside this house, because I would choose this mother and her little girl over 100 polished reputations that have forgotten how to treat another human being with dignity." The air inside the foyer felt different now, not because anyone had raised their voice, but because the truth had quietly walked into the room and refused to leave. I stood there trying to process what Mrs. Moretti had just revealed, while Lily carefully slipped the peppermint into her cardigan pocket, saving it for later the way children save things that meant more than candy. Around us, the guests who had been so eager to whisper only minutes earlier suddenly found great interest in their glasses of sparkling water or the floral arrangements lining the walls. It amazed me how quickly confidence disappeared when kindness exposed arrogance. Mrs. Moretti looked toward the event coordinator and smiled warmly. "Would you please make sure Emily has everything she needs to finish preparing for today's luncheon?" The coordinator nodded almost immediately. "Of course, Mrs. Moretti. We will take care of it right away." Her tone had completely changed. Not because I had become more important, but because someone important had reminded everyone that respect should never depend on status. Mrs. Moretti turned back to me. "Walk with me for a moment, Emily." I hesitated. "I still have work to finish." She smiled knowingly. "And it will still be waiting in 5 minutes." Lily reached for my hand, and together we followed Mrs. Moretti through a quiet hallway lined with family photographs. They were not portraits of business meetings or grand celebrations. They showed birthdays, holiday dinners, fishing trips, and children laughing with chocolate smeared across their faces. For the first time, the mansion felt less like an untouchable estate and more like a home. We stopped beside a sunlit sitting room overlooking the gardens. Mrs. Moretti lowered herself carefully into a chair and motioned for Lily to look outside. "Do you see those swans?" she asked. Lily hurried to the window. "They are beautiful. They return every spring," Mrs. Moretti said. "Home has a way of calling gentle hearts back." Then she looked at me with the same calm expression she had worn since entering the foyer. "I asked the housekeeping manager to schedule you here more often after that day outside the pharmacy." My eyes widened. "You did?" She nodded. "Not because I wanted to repay you. Gratitude can become pride if it insists on balancing every kindness. I simply wanted good people around this house." I did not know what to say. My life had taught me to expect disappointment far more often than generosity. "You never told me who you were," I finally whispered. She laughed softly. "Would you have treated me differently if I had?" I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. "No." "Exactly." She folded her hands neatly over the handle of her cane. "That answer is why I remembered your name." Lily suddenly pointed toward the long driveway beyond the gardens. "Mommy, look." I followed her finger and noticed several black luxury vehicles slowly approaching through the iron gates. Every gardener paused. Several members of the security team quietly adjusted their jackets and moved into position without being told. Even from this distance, the atmosphere shifted with silent precision. Mrs. Moretti glanced toward the window and released a quiet breath that sounded almost amused. "It appears my son has decided to come home earlier than expected." She looked back at me with a gentle smile that somehow carried both reassurance and warning. "Emily, there is something you should know about Adrian. The world usually notices his power first. I have always hoped someone would notice his heart before judging the rest." The engines fell silent one after another, yet somehow the sudden quiet carried even more weight than the sound itself. From the sunroom window, I watched the line of black vehicles come to a smooth stop beneath the circular entrance. Every door opened at nearly the same moment. Men in tailored dark suits stepped out first, scanning the grounds with calm professionalism before taking their places. Nobody rushed. Nobody shouted. Everything moved with practiced precision. The household staff instinctively straightened their uniforms. Conversations throughout the mansion faded into respectful whispers. Even guests who had spent the morning trying to impress one another suddenly became interested in standing a little taller. Mrs. Moretti simply smiled at Lily. "Would you hand me my cane, sweetheart?" Lily carefully carried it over with both hands. "Here you go." "Thank you. Your mother is raising a thoughtful young lady." My heart swelled more from those few words than I could explain. Then the front door opened. I did not see him immediately. I noticed everyone else's reaction first. Eyes shifted toward the entrance. Shoulders squared. The room seemed to breathe differently. When Adrian Moretti finally stepped inside, I understood why. He was taller than I expected, somewhere around 6'3", wearing a charcoal suit with the jacket unbuttoned over a crisp white shirt. The collar was open just enough to reveal the edge of dark tattoos climbing above his collarbone before disappearing beneath the fabric. More intricate ink disappeared beneath the rolled sleeves at his forearms, hinting at artwork that continued farther than I could see. His appearance was striking, but it was not what held everyone's attention. It was the quiet confidence with which he carried himself, as though he had nothing to prove because the room had already decided where he belonged. His green eyes moved across the foyer with careful focus before settling on his mother. The seriousness in his expression softened almost instantly. He crossed the room without hesitation and kissed her gently on the forehead. "You came earlier than expected," he said. "I wanted to surprise you," Mrs. Moretti replied. "It appears I succeeded." A faint smile touched his face before he noticed me standing beside Lily. His expression became thoughtful rather than suspicious. He did not stare. He simply observed, as though trying to understand the story before asking questions. Then he noticed Lily clutching her coloring book. She looked back at him with the fearless curiosity only children seem to possess. "Are you the man who lives in the castle?" she asked. I nearly stopped breathing. "Lily," I whispered, embarrassed. Adrian surprised me by kneeling until he was almost at eye level with her. "Sometimes," he answered with a small smile. "Although my mother insists it is just a house." Lily nodded very seriously. "She told me a house needs kind hearts." Adrian glanced toward Mrs. Moretti before looking back at his daughter-sized conversation partner. She says that often because she is usually right. Lily smiled, apparently satisfied with the answer. As Adrian stood again, his eyes returned to me. You must be Emily. There was no accusation in his voice, only recognition. I blinked in surprise. You know my name? He looked toward his mother with quiet affection. She has spoken about you more than once. Before I could respond, the event coordinator hurried into the room, looking visibly uncomfortable. She hesitated for only a second before addressing Adrian. Sir, there has been an unfortunate misunderstanding involving one of the guests. Adrian's expression did not harden. If anything, it became calmer. He slowly turned his attention toward the foyer where the woman in the ivory suit still stood waiting, and in a voice so even that everyone nearby fell silent to hear it, he asked, would someone kindly explain why my mother and her guests were made to feel unwelcome in our home? No one answered immediately. The silence stretched across the foyer until it felt heavier than the marble beneath our feet. Adrian did not repeat the question. He simply waited, his calm expression somehow making the room even more uncomfortable. The event coordinator finally cleared her throat. There was a disagreement after Miss Carter brought her daughter to work because of an emergency childcare situation. Some concerns were raised about whether they should remain at today's luncheon. Adrian listened without interrupting. His eyes briefly moved toward me, then to Lily, who stood quietly beside Mrs. Moretti with her coloring book tucked against her chest. Finally, he looked at the woman in the ivory suit. Would you like to add anything? She lifted her chin with practiced confidence. I believe I acted in the best interest of your family's reputation. High-profile events require standards. I simply questioned whether employees should bring children into such an exclusive gathering. Adrian nodded once, almost thoughtfully. And did either of them disturb the event? She hesitated. That is not the point. Did they interrupt a guest? He asked again. No. Did they damage any property? No. Did the little girl behave disrespectfully toward anyone? Another pause. No. Adrian folded his hands loosely in front of him. Then perhaps the issue was never their behavior. His voice remained steady, never rising above a normal conversation, yet every person in the foyer seemed to hear each word with perfect clarity. Mrs. Moretti rested one hand lightly on Lily's shoulder, her quiet smile never fading. Adrian continued, this home has hosted senators, judges, artists, veterans, teachers, and families who could barely afford gasoline to drive here. The invitation has never depended on wealth. It has always depended on character. I noticed several guests lower their eyes. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances, as though they suddenly recognized themselves somewhere inside his words. The woman in ivory forced another smile. I am sure we can move past this misunderstanding. Adrian looked at her for a long moment before answering. I agree. We should move past it. Relief briefly crossed her face until he turned toward the head of security. Please arrange transportation for Miss Harrington. She will not be attending today's luncheon. The words were delivered with complete courtesy, yet they carried unmistakable finality. No one argued. The security supervisor simply nodded. Yes, sir. Miss Harrington looked genuinely stunned. You are asking me to leave? Adrian met her eyes without hostility. No. I am protecting the atmosphere of today's gathering. The same words she had used earlier now rested quietly between them. A few guests looked away, embarrassed for her, while others remained perfectly still. She opened her mouth as though searching for another argument, but none came. After several long seconds, she picked up her designer handbag and walked toward the entrance with measured dignity, although her hurried steps revealed far more than her expression did. The front doors closed softly behind her. No applause followed. No celebration. Only a deep sense that something important had just happened. Adrian slowly turned back toward me. Miss Carter, he said gently, I owe you an apology. You came here to do your job, and instead you were asked to defend your dignity in my family's home. That should never have happened. I shook my head almost instinctively. You do not owe me anything. He offered the faintest smile. Perhaps not. But I believe decent people apologize when they have the opportunity to make something right. My mother taught me that long before she taught me anything else. For a moment, I forgot that hundreds of people were still standing around us. All I could focus on was the quiet sincerity in Adrian's voice. I had expected authority. I had expected confidence. I had never expected humility. Before I could answer, Lily slipped her small hand out of mine and walked toward him with the fearless honesty only children seem to possess. She stopped directly in front of him and looked up with a thoughtful expression. My mommy says saying sorry means you have a good heart. I felt my face warm with embarrassment. Lily, I whispered. Adrian smiled, the kind that reached his eyes this time. Your mommy sounds very wise. Lily considered that for a second before nodding. She is. She just forgets sometimes because she worries a lot. A quiet ripple of laughter spread through the room, gentle rather than mocking. Even I could not help smiling. Adrian glanced at me with an understanding that somehow made me feel seen instead of judged. Mrs. Moretti rested one hand against her son's arm. She worries because she has carried far more than one person should have to carry alone. Adrian remained silent for several seconds before asking me a simple question. Would you join us for lunch after the charity program ends? I instinctively shook my head. I appreciate the invitation, but I am working today. You have already done your work, Mrs. Moretti replied softly. The house is ready, and the guests have arrived. Sometimes accepting kindness is just as important as offering it. I looked around the room, uncertain whether I belonged anywhere except behind the scenes. Adrian seemed to understand exactly what I was thinking. Nobody at this table will be measuring your worth by your job title. Before I could respond, Lily tugged gently on my sleeve. Mommy, can we stay a little longer? I want to show Mrs. Moretti my castle drawing when I color the flowers. The older woman laughed warmly. I would be honored. She reached for Lily's little hand, and without hesitation my daughter placed it in hers. Watching them together filled a place inside my heart that had been empty for longer than I wanted to admit. My parents had passed away years earlier, and Lily had never really known what it felt like to have a grandmother waiting with gentle advice and peppermint candies tucked inside a pocket. Mrs. Moretti looked at the unfinished drawing and smiled. Would you like to see the rose garden after lunch? There are butterflies there almost every afternoon. Lily's eyes grew wide. Really? Really? She turned to Adrian. Will you come too? He looked genuinely surprised by the invitation. If your mother says it is all right. Lily immediately looked at me. I laughed quietly. I think that would be nice. The words left my mouth before I had time to overthink them. Adrian offered a grateful nod, almost as though I had given him something valuable. As guests slowly returned to their conversations, the tension that had filled the mansion earlier dissolved into something much warmer. People greeted one another more sincerely. Staff members smiled without forcing it. Even the sunlight pouring through the tall windows seemed brighter than before. Standing beside Mrs. Moretti and Lily, Adrian no longer looked like the distant man whose reputation entered a room before he did. For the first time, I saw someone who treasured his family more than his influence. And somewhere deep inside me, I realized the most powerful people were not the ones who demanded respect. They were the ones who quietly inspired it. By the time the charity luncheon ended, the mansion no longer felt like the intimidating place I had walked into that morning. Guests thanked the staff before leaving. Volunteers laughed together while packing donation boxes. Somewhere in the distance, a pianist played a quiet melody that drifted through the open windows, blending with the gentle breeze carrying the scent of roses from the gardens. Lily skipped beside Mrs. Moretti, proudly pointing out every flower she believed should be added to her drawing. I followed a few steps behind, still trying to understand how a single day could completely change the way I saw both the world and myself. We reached the rose garden just as the afternoon sunlight settled across the stone pathways in warm shades of gold. Butterflies floated lazily from bloom to bloom exactly as Mrs. Moretti had promised. Lily laughed and chased them with careful little steps, never trying to catch them, only wanting to see them fly. Adrian stood beside me with his hands resting comfortably in his pockets. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt easy instead of awkward. Finally, he looked toward the garden and said, My mother has not smiled that much in a long time. I watched Mrs. Moretti kneel beside Lily, showing her how to smell a rose without touching the delicate petals. She makes people feel important, I answered softly. Adrian nodded. She says you do the same. I looked down, unsure how to respond. Compliments had always made me uncomfortable because they felt unfamiliar. He noticed and smiled gently. You still do not believe it, do you? I shook my head. Most days I am just trying to get through the next one. He was quiet for a moment before saying, Sometimes surviving with kindness is a greater achievement than succeeding without it. Those words settled deep inside me. They sounded like something his mother would have taught him years ago, something he had never forgotten. Lily suddenly ran back toward us, her cheeks glowing with excitement. "Mommy, Mrs. Moretti says I can come back and help plant flowers next spring." I laughed. "Only if we are invited." Mrs. Moretti walked over with a warm smile. "Emily, this home will always have room for people who bring kindness through its doors." Emotion caught unexpectedly in my throat. I had spent so many years believing I needed to earn every place I stood that I had forgotten what simple acceptance felt like. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a small envelope. "This is not charity," he said before I could refuse it. "Inside is an offer to manage our Family Foundation's community outreach program. My mother believes you understand people better than most professionals we have interviewed, and I trust her judgment more than anyone else's." I stared at the envelope in disbelief. "I do not know what to say." Mrs. Moretti smiled. "Say you will think about it." I laughed through the tears gathering in my eyes. "I can do that." Lily wrapped her arms around Mrs. Moretti before turning to Adrian. Without hesitation, she hugged him too. He looked surprised for only a heartbeat before gently returning the hug with the careful tenderness of someone protecting something precious. When she stepped back, she looked up at him and asked, "Does this mean we are friends now?" Adrian glanced at me, then at his mother, before answering with a warmth that filled the entire garden. "I hope it means something even better. I hope it means you never have to wonder whether you are welcome here again." As we walked toward the mansion together beneath the fading afternoon sun, I realized that the most extraordinary moments rarely begin with perfect circumstances. Sometimes they begin with an ordinary act of kindness, tested by hardship, protected by courage, and remembered by hearts that choose compassion over pride. That day, I did not simply leave with a new opportunity. I left with hope, and sometimes hope is the truest way a family begins.